Hello, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and I'd like to look at the symbolism connected to the number 13, but also to music and geometry, calendar systems and others. Now, most people would associate 13 with unlucky 13, as in Friday the 13th, or how elevators in high-rises won't have a 13th floor. Also, some airlines won't have a 13th row in their seat. However, there's more to 13 and quite a few connections, and we'll look at those now. 13 is a very powerful symbolic number for many religions and cultures. Now, for instance, the 12 apostles plus 13 makes Jesus, and this is a common theme. So, for instance, Set had 72 conspirators against Osiris, so you have 72 plus the 73rd, and this will happen often. So 12 apostles plus Jesus equals 13. Now this will also apply in Shia Islam, where you have the 12 imams plus Muhammad making the 13. In Sunni Islam, 13 is not as important, but for the Shia it is, and we'll see this across many cultures, and especially esoteric connections leading to geometry and music as well. The American dollar bill is full of symbolism, and especially with connections to the number 13. So for instance, the pyramid on the American dollar bill has 13 levels. So there are 12 levels of masonry, so little bricks, but there is the foundation layer where we have 1776, that being the 13th layer. So that's the one of the references to 13, but through the rest of the dollar bill there are quite a few more. And so for instance, if you look at the eagle, it's carrying 13 arrows, and it has 13 leaves on the olive branch plus 13 olives. The olive branch is a symbol of peace, the arrows a symbol of war. Of course, there are also the star above the eagle's head, which has 13 stars. This is an important geometric link, but also the 13 stripes. Now originally there were only 12 colonies. I think it was Delaware was actually not a colony until after the Declaration. There are many links between the symbols on the American dollar bill, and of course the connection to founding fathers being almost to the man Masons, but on the Masonic organization, so for instance the York Rite has 13 degrees. Now this will connect rather nicely back to the American dollar bill. Now on the eagle, for instance, multiple references to 13, but there are also references to 32 and 33. Now for instance, on the Scottish Rite there are 32 degrees open and the 33rd by invitation. So as you see on the feathers on the wings of the eagle, 32 on the left hand side, 33 on the right hand side. So this number 33 as well as 32 over 33 being another example of this. So for instance, 72 plus 1 being the 73, 12 plus 1 being the 13, and that's another connection to that. Now also a nice link to 13 is the playing card. So for instance, you have 52 cards in total, 4 suits, therefore making 13 cards per suit. So it's also a good approximation of how many weeks there are in a season. 52 weeks per year, 4 seasons, 13 weeks. Now also in regards to music, so on the chromatic octave there are 12 notes but 13 inclusive, so again 12 plus 1 leading to 13. And as music, geometry, arithmetic and astronomy are connected together, well 13 is also referenced, very important in geometry. In regards to geometry, for instance, there are 13 Archimedean solids. Now for instance, the truncated icosahedron is hexagons and pentagons, the soccer ball pattern, 32 around the 33rd central point. But in regards to especially the fruit of life, it encloses 13 spheres. Now if you get 13 spheres, 12 of them will perfectly wrap around the 13th, another reference to 12 plus 1 around the 13th. And that's important because that creates the dodecahedron, which is one of the 5 Platonic solids. So Archimedean solids also lending itself to the Platonic solids as well. So quite a few connections, music, geometry and arithmetic, astronomy as well. Could go on a little bit further, but now let's look at calendar systems. The Venus of Lucille in France, dated to between 18,000 or up to possibly 23,000 years old. What's interesting about this is that it's a bas relief and that it's been carved as a three-dimensional shape into the stone. So not just sort of carved into the stone, but it's been born out of the stone. Now, bas reliefs famously, for instance, in Göbekli Tepe, this could be of equal or older date, which is interesting. However, what's nice about that is that she's holding a horn, suspected a bison horn, or sometimes referred to as a cornucopia, and that has 13 markings on it, which is a important reference. So not just 13, but this will also lead to some other important, interesting points. Now, it's been suggested that 13 is a connection to the lunar cults and especially to femininity, and by that, for instance, well, what very much defines a feminine is the 13 menstrual cycles per year. So varies slightly, but the standard is 28 days, so 13 times 28 is 364, so 13 menstrual cycles per year. However, menstruation literally comes from the basically emerges from the same origins of the word month, and that will also lead to leading back to lunar cults and especially connections to the 13 full moons per year. So on average there are 29.35 days between full moons, so that's the 30-day month for 29.35 being the 30th day for full moons. Now that will not directly connected to the blue moon, but that is a relevant aspect to it. So on average there are 12.369 days, 12.369 full moons per year, or one every 29.53 days on average. Now a blue moon is when we have two full moons in a calendar month, but because there are 12.369, basically works out that every third year we will have 13 full moons. So usually we'll have 12 full moons per year, but every third year there are 13 full moons. So again, this 12 plus 1 connection joining in nicely and linking especially to fertility cults, so like the Venus of Willendorf, or the Venus we saw earlier, where we have these feminine fertility aspects, and have been being of course very much connected to the moon and menstrual cycles. This also lends itself nicely to the Egyptian calendar system, which was later adopted by the Romans. Now, the Egyptian calendar had 12 months of 30 days, 360 days, plus a 13th month, which was named Thoth. Now, Thoth won every 172 days from the moon, but the 13th month in the Egyptian story was, so you had 360, let's just call them mortal days, or the canonical year, and then we had a 13th month of 5 days. That was the time which the gods Osiris, Isis and others were born. That being the 13th month connected to the calendar system, but this will also join nicely to the Mayan calendar system, and they had multiple calendars. So for instance, they had a calendar based on the 365 day year, but they also had a ritual calendar as well. The Mayan ritual calendar was of 260 days, the Tzolkin, and that was, let's just call them 20 periods of 13 days. So a nice little link to 13, but they also had a solar calendar, a very accurate solar calendar, but this ritual calendar had no astronomical connections. It was essentially a ritual calendar, and this symbol to connections between, again, multiple cultures, multiple times, and the importance of the number 13. Now it's also a Fibonacci number, it's also a prime number, but let's look at some of the important aspects, what got me particularly interested in this connection, and that's to systems of law as well. As was mentioned earlier, we saw the 12 apostles plus Jesus, or the 12 imams plus Muhammad. This concept of the 12 plus the 1 references, especially to legal systems. For instance, the jury of 12 plus one judge equals 13. Now this will also extend into hanging, and there are the symbolical symbolism in, well, the gallows also links to the 12 plus the 1 being 13. In America, Britain and elsewhere, especially in the last few centuries, the connection between the gallows and 13, multiple references to that. Now, for instance, there will be 13 steps to the gallows. So once again, there'll be 12 steps, but the 13th step is onto the platform itself. But also the noose is traditionally has 13 loops on the noose, and I'll have a little clip at the end to explain that a little bit further. But this connection between, well, hanging and death as well can also be seen in the tarot cards. Much like the 13 steps to the gallows and the 13 loops on the noose, again 12 steps plus the platform being the 13th. Well, it's interesting that the 12th tarot card is called the Hanged Man, while the 13th tarot card is Death. So what we see in different traditions and different cultures, but this importance of this number 13 in a symbolic sense. I don't usually like to deal with these smaller numbers because whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, these smaller numbers have so many aspects, it's too easy to choose. That's why I like the larger numbers and those connections between the cultures, because that's much higher levels of improbability that they would all fall onto these numbers. But there are quite a few nice connections, well, not necessarily nice in this case, but very important symbolism as well. So for instance, 13 is the puberty, but traditionally, at least in Judaism, when a boy becomes a man, and other connections like that. It's much more than what I'm showing here. So traditionally 13 the unlucky number, but you'll see it reflected often in religion, esoteric symbolism. For instance, Christian, Shia, Islam, Freemasonry, but playing cards, music, also important in geometry, also especially important in fertility, femininity, and that lending to menstrual and the moon cycles as well, which brings us to Egypt, and also reflected in the Mayan systems, but in the law as well. So I'll end with a prison guard. Have a good one.
It has 13 loops. The steps going up to the gallows has 12 steps, and then the 13th one was the platform. It all has something to do with that. Most people believe 13 because it's the unlucky number. Actually, it's for 12 jurors and one judge. Okay, that's what it stood for. Okay, if you come across some old inmates that's done a lot of time in prison, most of them have a tattoo on them, 13 and a half. 12 jurors, one judge, and a 50-50 chance of life.